The winter of 1872 came early to the Oklahoma Territory, brutal and unforgiving as a wolf's jaw. Thomas Reed huddled beneath his threadbare blanket, watching his breath crystallize in the air of the abandoned trapper's cabin he'd claimed for shelter. At 23, he was the youngest scout the cavalry had ever hired, his skills with tracking unmatched despite his youth. But skills didn't keep a man warm when the temperature dropped below freezing and his supplies had run out 2 days prior. The fever had started that morning, hot waves that made his vision swim, followed by bone-deep chills that no amount of shivering could shake. His horse had thrown a shoe 15 miles back, and he'd been forced to continue on foot through increasingly treacherous terrain. Now, as darkness fell and snow began to fall in thick curtains outside, Thomas faced the very real possibility that he might not see morning. Before we continue with Thomas's desperate situation, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. Your support truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening to this story from? Are you at home, on a commute, or perhaps somewhere else? Let us know in the comments. The sound of approaching footsteps crunched through the snow outside. Thomas's hand went instinctively to his rifle, though his fingers were so numb he could barely grip the stock. The door pushed open, and 2 figures entered, bringing with them a gust of freezing wind and swirling snow. They were Cherokee women, but unlike any Thomas had ever seen. The first stood nearly 6 feet tall, her frame powerfully built beneath layers of buckskin and fur. Her face was striking, high cheekbones, obsidian eyes that seemed to see straight through him, and long black hair braided with strips of leather and beads. The second was even taller, perhaps 6 feet 2, with shoulders as broad as any man's and arms that spoke of a lifetime of physical labor. Both carried packs that would have staggered a smaller person, moving with the casual strength of mountain lions. "You are sick," the first woman said, her English accented but clear. She crossed the small space and placed a hand on Thomas's forehead before he could protest. Her palm was warm, calloused, and surprisingly gentle. "Fever. When did you last eat?" 2, 3 days, Thomas managed through chattering teeth. "I can pay. I have—" "We do not want your money, Scout," the second woman interrupted, already unpacking supplies with efficient movements. "You would be dead by morning without help. That is reason enough." The first woman smiled slightly, the expression that softened her fierce features. "I am Aida. This is my sister, Sequoia. We are heading to our winter camp, but the storm has trapped us here, as it has trapped you. We will share this shelter tonight." Within minutes, they had transformed the miserable cabin. Sequoia coaxed the dying embers in the fireplace into a proper blaze, while Aida produced dried meat, cornmeal, and herbs from their packs. The warmth began to seep back into the small space, and with it, Thomas felt his rigid muscles begin to relax. "You should remove those wet clothes," Aida said matter-of-factly, not looking at him as she mixed something in a small pot. "Hypothermia will kill you as surely as fever. We will turn our backs if your modesty requires it." Thomas's face flushed, whether from fever or embarrassment. He couldn't say. He'd been raised in a strict Methodist household in Virginia, where even the mention of such things was forbidden. At 23, he'd never been alone with a woman, much less 2, and certainly never in a state of undress. I don't think," he stammered. Sequoia turned from the fire, her dark eyes amused. "You are a virgin, yes? This we can see. But tonight is about survival, not seduction, young scout. Your innocence is safe with us." Despite his embarrassment, Thomas found himself trusting them. There was something in their manner, direct, competent, utterly without pretense, that put him at ease, even as it unsettled him. He managed to strip down to his union suit while they busied themselves with preparations, and Aida draped his wet clothes near the fire to dry. She brought him a cup of bitter-smelling tea. "Drink. It will help the fever." The liquid burned going down, tasting of bark and earth. But within minutes, Thomas felt the worst of the chills receding. Sequoia handed him a bowl of thick stew, and he ate ravenously, hardly tasting it in his hunger. "How long have you been scouting?" Aida asked, settling cross-legged by the fire. In the flickering light, her features seemed carved from bronze, beautiful in their strength. "6 months, Thomas admitted. "I'm good with tracks, patterns. Not so good with everything else, apparently." "Tracking is a gift," Sequoia said, her deep voice thoughtful. "But survival requires more than one skill. Who taught you to scout without proper supplies?" "Nobody taught me much of anything," Thomas said quietly. "My father died when I was 12. Mother remarried a man who didn't want stepchildren. I left at 16, taught myself what I could." The sisters exchanged a glance, something unspoken passing between them. Aida leaned forward, her expression serious. "Then, you have survived on instinct and luck. But the territory is not forgiving of those who rely on luck alone. If you wish, we can teach you what you need to know. Not tonight. Tonight you rest. But in the morning, if the storm has passed, we will show you how to truly read the land." Thomas nodded, suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite name. These women had no reason to help him, yet they offered not just immediate aid, but knowledge. The most valuable gift of all. As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, they talked. Aida and Sequoia spoke of their people's displacement, the long march west that had killed so many, the struggle to maintain their ways in a world that seemed determined to erase them. Thomas, in turn, spoke of his loneliness, the isolation that came from being always an outsider, too educated for rough company, too poor and unconnected for society. "You are like us," Sequoia observed, "caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither." The words struck something deep in Thomas's chest. He'd never heard his existence described so accurately. Aida rose and retrieved more blankets from their packs. "We should sleep. The storm will not break before dawn." She paused, studying Thomas with those penetrating dark eyes. "You are still feverish. Body heat is the best medicine. We will sleep close, the 3 of us. This is practical, not improper." Thomas's pulse quickened, but he nodded. He was still shivering despite the fire, and he knew she was right. The sisters arranged the blankets into a nest near the hearth, and they settled in with Thomas between them. The closeness was overwhelming. He could feel Aida's warmth along his left side, Sequoia's solid presence on his right. Both women radiated heat like living furnaces, and gradually, inevitably, the trembling in his limbs subsided. "Relax," Aida murmured, her breath warm against his ear. "You are safe here. We will protect you while you heal." "Why?" Thomas whispered into the darkness. "Why help me at all?" Sequoia's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers strong and steady. because you needed help, because you did not look at us with fear or hatred, because sometimes the measure of a person is found in a single moment of vulnerability. And in that moment, we saw someone worth saving. Something shifted in Thomas's chest, a wall he hadn't known he'd built beginning to crack. He'd spent so long alone, so long afraid of depending on anyone, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly cared for. Together, Aita said softly. Tonight we survive together. Together, Thomas echoed, and felt both women's grips tighten gently in response. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deeper and more peaceful than any Thomas had known in months. He dreamed of open plains and distant mountains, of hands that could gentle wild horses and voices that could calm storms. In his dreams, he was not alone, not drifting, but anchored by the weight of trust given and received. He woke once in the deepest part of night. The fire had burned low, painting the cabin in amber and shadow. Sequoia was awake, her dark eyes reflecting the embers as she kept watch. When she noticed him stirring, she pressed a hand gently to his forehead, checking his temperature. "The fever has broken," she whispered. "You will live, young scout." "Thank you," Thomas breathed. "Both of you. I don't know how to—" "Hush. There will be time for words in the morning. Sleep now." But Thomas couldn't quite return to sleep yet. In the warm darkness, pressed between these two remarkable women, he felt something awakening in him that had nothing to do with fever or cold. It was desire, yes, but more than that. A hunger for connection, for touch, for the intimacy of being truly known by another person. "Sequoia," he whispered, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What is it like to be close to someone, to be with them?" The question hung in the air between them. Sequoia was quiet for a long moment, and Thomas feared he'd overstepped. But then her hand found his again in the darkness. "It is like this," she said softly. "Warmth in the cold, trust in uncertainty, the knowledge that you do not face the darkness alone. Physical joining is only one small part of it." Thomas Reed. The true shape of desire is in the choosing. Choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to let another see you fully, choosing to remain even when it would be easier to flee. Aita stirred on his other side, her voice husky with sleep. "My sister speaks wisdom. Desire is not only the body's hunger, though that is real and good. It is the soul's hunger, to be witnessed, to be accepted, to matter to another living being." Thomas felt tears prickling at his eyes. "I've never mattered to anyone." "That is not true," Aita said, fully awake now. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with infinite gentleness. "You matter to us. Already, in one night, you have shown us courtesy and respect that many would not. You have listened to our stories without judgment. You have allowed us to help you without false pride. These things matter, Thomas Reed. You matter." "I wish," Thomas began, then stopped, uncertain how to voice what he felt. "What do you wish?" Sequoia prompted. "I wish this night would never end. I wish I could stay here, like this, and never have to face the cold again." Aita's fingers brushed his cheek, wiping away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. "All things end, Scout, but endings make way for new beginnings. When the storm passes and we part ways, you will carry this night with you. You will know that such connection is possible, and you will seek it again." That is the gift we give you. Not false comfort, but real hope. The three of them lay quiet after that, bound together by shared warmth and shared words. Thomas felt his understanding of himself shifting, expanding. He'd come to the territory to escape his past, but he realized now that he'd been running from more than just a cruel stepfather. He'd been running from the vulnerability of needing others, of letting himself be seen. As dawn began to gray the windows, the storm finally broke. Sequoia rose first, stirring the fire and setting water to boil. Aita stretched like a great cat, her movements fluid and powerful, then began to organize their supplies for departure. Thomas sat up slowly, testing his body. The fever was truly gone, leaving him weak but clear-headed. He felt different somehow, as though something fundamental had shifted in the night. "Come," Aita said, tossing him his now dry clothes. "Get dressed. We promised to teach you, and we keep our promises." Outside, the world was transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine, turning the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. The sun broke through thinning clouds, casting long shadows across the white expanse. For the next 3 hours, the sisters showed Thomas things his formal education had never taught him. How to read the subtle signs of game trails beneath new snow. How to identify edible plants even in winter. How to build a proper shelter that would retain heat without suffocating its occupants. How to navigate by stars and sun when landmarks disappeared. But more than practical skills, they taught him about respect for the land, for its original inhabitants, for the delicate balance that kept life possible in such harsh conditions. They spoke of their people's relationship with this territory, the sacred sites that the government now claimed as public land, the hunting grounds that were being fenced and forbidden. "You are a scout for the cavalry," Sequoia said, as they paused to rest. "This puts us on opposite sides of a conflict neither of us chose." Thomas nodded slowly. "I know. I've seen things I'm not proud of, orders that made me sick to follow. But I needed the work, and I told myself I was just doing a job." "And now?" Aita asked, her dark eyes intense. "Now I don't know if I can continue. Not after last night. Not after this." He gestured at the landscape around them, at the sisters who had shown him such kindness. "How can I help hunt people who have shown me more humanity than my own countrymen?" "That is a question only you can answer," Sequoia said. "But I will tell you this, there are other ways to make a living, other places that need good scouts. The railroad needs surveyors. Settlers need guides who know the land and respect it. You have choices, Thomas Reed, even if they do not seem obvious now." They walked back to the cabin in contemplative silence. When they arrived, Aita placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, stopping him before they entered. "Tonight, we will share the fire again," she said. "One more night before we part ways. And tonight, if you wish, we will teach you more than just survival skills. We will show you the shape of desire you asked about, not as seduction, but as education, as gift between friends." Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. Are you certain? I don't want you to feel obligated." Sequoia laughed, a rich, warm sound. "Oh, young scout, do we seem like women who do anything out of obligation? If we make this offer, it is because we choose to, because we see in you someone who will treat such a gift with the respect it deserves. But you must choose as well. There is no shame in refusing." Thomas thought about it as they prepared a simple meal, as the sun tracked across the sky and began its descent. He thought about his upbringing, the teachings that had called such desires sinful. But he also thought about the grace these women had shown him, the way they'd cared for him in his weakness and taught him in his ignorance. As evening fell and they once again arranged their bedding near the fire, Thomas made his choice. "I want to learn," he said quietly, "if you're willing to teach me." What passed between them that night was tender, careful, and profoundly healing. The sisters guided him with patience and humor, showing him that intimacy could be joyful rather than shameful, sacred rather than sinful. They taught him that a woman's pleasure was not incidental, but essential, that strength and gentleness were not opposites, but partners. Aita showed him how touch could speak louder than words, her hands teaching his body a new language. Sequoia demonstrated that vulnerability was not weakness, but the deepest form of courage. Together, they helped him shed years of fear and repression, replacing it with wonder and reverence. "Go slow," Aita murmured at one point, when his enthusiasm outpaced his skill. "There is no rush. We have all night." "I don't want to hurt you," Thomas breathed, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion. "You won't," Sequoia assured him. "You are gentle by nature, Thomas Reed. Trust yourself as we trust you." And he did. For the first time in his life, he trusted himself, trusted his body, trusted the connection between himself and another person. It was transformative in ways he couldn't fully articulate, awakening that went far deeper than physical pleasure. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the firelight, Thomas felt tears on his cheeks again. But these were different, not tears of loneliness or pain, but of gratitude and awe. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for saving my life, for teaching me, for seeing something in me worth your time." Aida kissed his forehead gently. "You gave us a gift as well, Scout. You reminded us that not all white men are enemies. That understanding is possible, even across great divides. That is worth more than you know." They slept deeply that night, exhausted and content. When morning came, it brought the bittersweet knowledge that their time together had ended. As Thomas prepared to leave, his supplies replenished from the sisters' generous packs, his knowledge expanded beyond measure. Sequoia pressed something into his hand. It was a small medicine pouch, beaded with intricate patterns. "For protection," she said, "and to remember what you learned here." "I will never forget," Thomas promised, "either of you or these 2 nights." "Our winter camp is in the Arbuckle Mountains," Aida said. "If you find yourself there, if you choose to leave the cavalry and seek a different path, you will be welcome. We could use a scout who understands both worlds." The offer hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Thomas tucked the medicine pouch carefully into his shirt, feeling it rest against his heart. "I'll come," he said with sudden certainty. "I don't know when, but I'll find you, I promise." They parted ways then, the sisters heading west toward their people, Thomas turning east toward the cavalry fort where he was expected to report. But with every step, he felt the pull backward, toward the mountains and the future that might wait there. The 3 months that followed were the longest of Thomas's life. Returning to Fort Gibson felt like descending into a tomb. The wooden palisade walls that had once represented safety now felt like prison bars. Every order he received, every patrol he led, every report he filed, all of it tasted like ash in his mouth. Captain Marcus Thornton noticed the change immediately. He was a career soldier, weathered and cynical, with eyes that missed nothing. On Thomas's third day back, Thornton called him into his office. "You've gone soft, Reed," Thornton said without preamble, leaning back in his chair. "I've seen it before. A man spends time in the wilderness, maybe meets some sympathetic savages, and suddenly he forgets what side he's on." Thomas kept his face carefully neutral. "I completed my scouting mission, sir. My report is thorough." "Your report is clinical. No observations about Cherokee movements in the Arbuckle region? No intelligence about winter camps or supply routes?" Thornton's eyes narrowed. "You were out there for weeks. Either you're incompetent, which I don't believe, or you're hiding something." "The storm was severe, sir. I barely survived. Most of my time was spent finding shelter." Thornton stood and circled his desk, stopping close enough that Thomas could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Let me tell you something, Scout. There's a new Indian agent arriving next month, Silas Crenshaw. He's got authorization to relocate any Cherokee found outside designated boundaries. He's also got a reputation for being enthusiastic about his work. He'll want detailed maps, locations, patterns, and you're going to provide them." Thomas's blood ran cold. "Sir, the Cherokee in that region have lived there for generations. They're peaceful." "They're squatters on federal land," Thornton interrupted. "And if you can't do your job, I'll find someone who can." Dismissed. That night, Thomas lay awake in his narrow bunk, staring at the rough wooden ceiling. The medicine pouch Sequoia had given him rested against his chest, hidden beneath his uniform. He touched it through the fabric, remembering the weight of her words. "You have choices, Thomas Reed, even if they do not seem obvious now." The choice was becoming very obvious indeed. Over the following weeks, Thomas watched the fort's operations with new eyes. He saw how the soldiers talked about the Cherokee as animals to be corralled, problems to be solved. He watched supply wagons arrive, loaded with spoiled flour and rancid meat destined for the reservation, while the fort's stores overflowed with quality provisions. He heard the jokes about blanket parties and Indian hunts, and felt sick to his stomach. But it was the arrival of Silas Crenshaw that crystallized everything. Crenshaw was a tall man with the build of an undertaker and the eyes of a shark. He rode into Fort Gibson on a black horse, accompanied by 6 hired guns who looked more like outlaws than lawmen. Within an hour of his arrival, he'd called a meeting in the mess hall. "Gentlemen," Crenshaw began, his voice smooth as oil, "I represent the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and I'm here to solve the Cherokee problem once and for all. There are at least 3 unauthorized camps in the Arbuckle Mountains. These savages are hunting game that belongs to American citizens, using timber that should fuel American industry, and occupying land that American families could homestead." Thomas stood at the back of the room, his hands clenched into fists. "I need detailed intelligence," Crenshaw continued. "Camp locations, population numbers, defensive capabilities, and supply sources. I understand we have an excellent scout. Thomas Reed, stand up, son." Every eye in the room turned to Thomas. He rose slowly, feeling trapped. "Reed, you've spent more time in that territory than anyone. I'll need everything you know about Cherokee movements. We'll start with a private briefing tomorrow morning. I want maps, routes, the works." Thomas managed a nod, but his mind was racing. If he gave Crenshaw what he wanted, Ayita and Sequoia's camp would be destroyed. Families would be torn apart, forced onto the long march to barren reservation lands. Children would die. Elders would perish. Everything he'd learned, everyone who'd shown him kindness, obliterated. But if he refused, he'd be court-martialed, possibly hanged for treason. That night, he made his decision. Thomas spent the next day appearing to cooperate, pulling out old survey maps and plotting false locations, camps that didn't exist, routes that led nowhere. He made everything look convincing enough to pass casual inspection, but useless for actual operations. Then he packed his essentials, his rifle, ammunition, dried rations, the few possessions that mattered, and waited for the changing of the guard. At 2 a.m, when the sentries were at their drowsiest, Thomas slipped over the fort's back wall. He'd chosen a moonless night, and his knowledge of patrol patterns made avoiding detection almost easy. By dawn, he was 20 miles away, riding hard toward the Arbuckle Mountains. He knew what he'd done. Desertion in wartime was a hanging offense, even if there was no declared war. He was now a fugitive, hunted by the same government he'd once served. But as the miles fell away behind him and the mountains grew larger on the horizon, Thomas felt lighter than he had in months. He'd chosen not comfort, not safety, not the approval of men like Thornton and Crenshaw. He'd chosen the 2 women who'd saved his life and taught him what it meant to truly live. He just hoped he'd reach them in time to warn them. 3 days of hard riding brought Thomas to the approximate area where he believed the winter camp might be. But finding it was another matter entirely. The Cherokee knew how to hide in plain sight, and Thomas's tracking skills, while good, weren't good enough to spot signs that had been deliberately concealed. He was camped on the 4th night, trying to decide his next move, when he heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked behind his head. "Give me one reason not to shoot you, soldier boy." Thomas froze. The voice was male, young and full of anger. Slowly, he raised his hands. "I'm looking for Aida and Sequoia," he said carefully. "They'll vouch for me." The sisters? Why would they know a cavalry scout? "I met them 3 months ago. They saved my life during the winter storm. Please, I have information they need. There's danger coming." A long silence. Then, "Stand up. Slow. Keep your hands where I can see them." Thomas complied, turning slowly to face his captor. The man was perhaps 20. With traditional Cherokee clothing and a face marked by old burn scars. His rifle never wavered. "You're the one Aida spoke of," the young man said, his tone shifting slightly from hostile to merely suspicious. "The scout who promised to come back." "Yes, my name is Thomas Reed, and I need to see them now. There's an Indian agent named Crenshaw coming with soldiers. They're planning to raid the camps, force everyone onto the reservation." The young man's jaw tightened. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" Thomas reached slowly into his shirt and withdrew the medicine pouch Sequoia had given him. "They gave me this. They told me I'd be welcome if I came back. I've deserted the cavalry to warn them. I'm risking everything to be here." Another long moment of evaluation. Then the young man lowered his rifle slightly. "I am Waya. I will take you to the camp. But if you have lied, if this is betrayal, you will not leave the mountains alive." "I understand." The journey to the camp took another 2 hours, following trails that seemed to appear and disappear like magic. When they finally emerged into the hidden valley, Thomas's breath caught. It was more beautiful than he'd imagined. Traditional dwellings arranged in a careful pattern. Smoke rising from central fires. the sound of voices and laughter carrying on the evening air. Then he saw her. Ayita emerged from one of the larger structures, and the moment her eyes found his, her expression transformed from surprise to joy. "You came," she said, closing the distance between them in long strides. "I hoped you would, but I did not let myself believe it." "I promised," Thomas said, feeling something tight in his chest finally release. "And I needed to see you again, both of you. But Ayita, there's danger." "I know," she interrupted, her joy fading to grim determination. "Come, we must speak with the council, and with Sequoia." The council meeting that followed was tense. Thomas explained everything. Crenshaw's arrival, his plans, the timeline for the raids. The elders listened gravely, their faces showing the weight of countless similar threats over countless years. "We could move the camp," one elder suggested. "Further into the mountains." "Winter is not yet over," another countered. "Moving now would mean leaving food stores, exposing the sick and elderly to harsh conditions. Many would not survive." "Then we fight," a younger warrior proposed. "We have rifles, men who know how to use them. We defend our home." "And give them justification for slaughter?" an older woman asked sharply. "No, we are not strong enough to win such a fight, and even victory would only bring more soldiers." The debate continued for over an hour, with no clear solution emerging. Thomas sat quietly, aware that he was an outsider despite Ayita's presence at his side. This wasn't his decision to make. Finally, Sequoia spoke. She'd been silent throughout, but when her deep voice cut through the argument, everyone stopped to listen. "There is another way," she said. "Reed came here at great personal cost to warn us. He has knowledge of how the cavalry thinks, how they operate. He can help us appear to comply, while actually preserving what matters most: our people, our children, our elders. Not our land, for that they will take regardless, but our lives." "You suggest surrender?" a warrior asked incredulously. "I suggest strategy," Sequoia corrected. "Reed, if we moved the vulnerable members of our community, the children, elderly, sick, to a more remote location, could we make it appear that we had simply dispersed? Give the soldiers an empty camp to find?" Thomas considered it carefully. "It could work, if timed right, if you left enough behind to make it look like natural departure rather than organized evacuation. Crenshaw will come regardless, but if he finds nothing to relocate, he'll eventually move on to other areas." "And where would our people go?" an elder asked. "There are caves further in the mountains," Ayita said. "The sacred places our ancestors used for ceremonies. They could shelter there temporarily." The council continued deliberating, but Thomas could see a consensus forming. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it gave them a chance, which was more than they'd had before. As the meeting broke up, Sequoia approached Thomas. She was even more impressive than he remembered, tall and strong and radiating quiet authority. "You gave up everything to come here," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Not everything. I gained more than I lost." A slight smile touched her lips. "The offer still stands, Thomas Reed. To stay, to become one of us, to build a life here. But now you know what that life entails. Hiding, moving, constantly looking over our shoulders. This is the reality of loving us. It is not romantic stories around a fire. It is survival and struggle and sacrifice." Thomas met her eyes steadily. "I know, and I still choose it. I still choose you, both of you." Sequoia's smile widened, and she reached out to clasp his shoulder, with surprising gentleness. Then tomorrow, we begin preparations. Tonight, you rest. You have ridden far and risked much. That deserves acknowledgement. That night, Thomas once again found himself between Ayita and Sequoia, but this time in a proper dwelling rather than an abandoned cabin. The similarity and difference of the situation wasn't lost on him. "I missed you," Ayita said softly in the darkness. "Both of us did. We spoke of you often, wondering if you would truly come." "I couldn't stay away," Thomas admitted. "Every day at the fort felt wrong, like I was betraying something fundamental by being there." "You betrayed nothing," Sequoia murmured. "You came as soon as you understood. That is all anyone can do. Learn, and then act on what they've learned." They lay quiet for a moment, listening to the sounds of the camp settling for the night. Then Ayita spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "In our traditions, there is a ceremony for those who choose to join the tribe from outside. It involves tests of courage, of skill, of commitment. You have already passed these tests, Thomas Reed. You faced danger to warn us. You sacrificed your position and safety. You have proven yourself worthy." "What does that mean?" Thomas asked. "It means," Sequoia said, "that when this crisis has passed, if you still wish it, we can formalize what is already true. You can become truly Cherokee, not by blood, but by choice. And you can become truly ours, not by circumstance, but by ceremony." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I wish it, more than anything." "Then it will be so," Ayita promised. "But first, we survive. We protect our people. We face Crenshaw and whatever he brings. Together." "Together," Thomas echoed, feeling both their hands find his in the darkness. They made love that night with a new intensity, born of reunion and danger, and the knowledge that their time together was precious and uncertain. It was different from that first educational night. Now there was familiarity, understanding, a rhythm they'd already begun to establish. But it was no less powerful for that. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Ayita traced the medicine pouch that still hung around Thomas's neck. "You kept it," she observed. "Every day. It reminded me what I was coming back to." "And now that you're here?" Sequoia asked. "Any regrets?" Thomas looked at both women, their strong, beautiful faces softened by firelight and affection, and shook his head firmly. "None. This is where I belong. With you, with your people. Whatever comes, we face it together." The next 2 weeks were a frenzy of careful preparation. The most vulnerable members of the tribe were moved to the sacred caves, a journey that took days and required constant vigilance. Thomas used his knowledge of cavalry patrol patterns to help them avoid detection, scouting ahead to ensure their route remained clear. Meanwhile, the main camp was carefully staged to look abandoned, but not destroyed. Fires left cold, possessions scattered, as though people had left in natural dispersal rather than organized flight. It had to appear genuine, to satisfy Crenshaw's suspicions, without giving away their actual location. Thomas worked alongside Weah, the young warrior who'd first confronted him. A grudging respect was forming between them. "You fight well for a white man," Weah commented, as they practiced with knives one afternoon. "Most soldiers rely too much on guns." "Most soldiers never expected to need more than guns," Thomas countered, parrying a strike. "I'm learning that was arrogant." Weah grinned. "At least you learn. That makes you smarter than most." The day Crenshaw's forces arrived, Thomas watched from a concealed position on the ridge above the valley. Ayita and Sequoia were with him, along with several warriors who would serve as witnesses to whatever happened. Crenshaw rode in with 20 soldiers and his 6 hired guns. They swept through the abandoned camp with brutal efficiency, overturning everything, searching for anything valuable to confiscate. "Where are they?" Crenshaw demanded, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "Reed's intelligence said there should be at least 50 people here." "Looks like they moved on, sir," one soldier reported. "Trail's at least 2 weeks old, and it splits into multiple directions. Could take months to track them all down." Thomas saw Crenshaw's jaw clench in fury. The man had come expecting easy targets and found only ghosts. It was a small victory, but a vital one. "Burn it," Crenshaw finally ordered. "Everything. If we can't relocate them, we'll make sure they have nothing to come back to." The soldiers set fires throughout the camp. Thomas watched the dwellings his friends had built burn, felt Aida and Sequoia tense beside him, saw the pain in the eyes of the warriors around them. But no one moved, no one gave away their position. When Crenshaw and his men finally rode away, disgusted and empty-handed, the Cherokee emerged from their hiding places. The camp was destroyed, but the people were safe. It was the best outcome they could have hoped for. That night, gathered in the cave system that had become their temporary home, the tribe held a ceremony. Thomas knelt before the elders. As they spoke words in Cherokee he was only beginning to understand. They painted his face with sacred symbols, gave him a new name in their language, Waya Unega, which meant Wolf White, for his ability to track and hunt alongside them, despite his origins. But the most important moment came when Aita and Sequoia stood before the tribe and declared their intention to bind themselves to him formally, in accordance with Cherokee custom. The ceremony was beautiful and solemn, conducted by the eldest woman in the tribe. "These three choose each other freely," she proclaimed, "not bound by the laws of the white world, which does not understand such things, but by our traditions, which recognize that love takes many forms. We witness this choosing and honor it." The tribe celebrated late into the night, despite their difficult circumstances. There was music and dancing, food shared from precious stores, stories told around fires that had to be kept small to avoid detection. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the warmth of their acceptance, the genuine joy they took in his union with the sisters. As the celebration wound down and people began to settle for sleep, Aita led Thomas and Sequoia to a secluded alcove deeper in the cave system. Someone had prepared a private space for them, blankets, a small fire, even some wildflowers gathered from the mountainside. "Our wedding night," Sequoia said with a smile. "Humble, perhaps, compared to white traditions, but ours nonetheless." "It's perfect," Thomas said honestly. "Everything I never knew I needed." They came together that night as husband and wives, bound now not just by affection, but by vows spoken before witnesses, by promises made and meant. It was tender and passionate, celebratory and sacred, all at once. In the quiet aftermath, Thomas lay between his wives and thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. A year ago, he'd been a lonely scout, freezing to death in a cabin, certain he would die unmourned and unmissed. Now he was part of a family, a community, a people who had accepted him despite everything he represented. "What are you thinking?" Aita asked, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest. "That I'm grateful," Thomas said, "for the storm that forced me into that cabin, for both of you finding me, for every choice that led to this moment." "Even the painful choices?" Sequoia asked. "Even desertion and exile and watching our camp burn?" "Especially those," Thomas said firmly, "because they taught me who I really am. Not a soldier following orders, but a man making choices." choosing love over duty, justice over law, belonging over approval. This is wisdom, Aita said approvingly. You truly have become Cherokee in spirit, Wahya Unega. They slept deeply that night, wrapped in each other and in the security of their commitment. Whatever came next, whether they could rebuild, where they would go, how they would survive, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together. It took Thomas 3 months to settle his affairs and resign his commission, but those months had been spent not at Fort Gibson, but living as Cherokee, learning their ways, proving his commitment. By the time spring came and the crisis had passed, his transformation was complete. The cavalry commander might have tried to convince him to stay, but Thomas's mind was made up long before. He'd seen too much, learned too much, to ever go back to serving a cause he no longer believed in. He bought a sturdy horse, quality supplies, and set out for the Arbuckle Mountains in early spring. The journey took 2 weeks, and with every mile, his anticipation grew. Would they remember him? Would the offer still stand? Had he romanticized their time together beyond what it actually was? But when he finally found their camp, a collection of traditional dwellings nestled in a protected valley, and Aita emerged from one of the structures, her face lighting up with genuine joy at the sight of him, all his doubts vanished. "You came," she said, crossing the distance between them in long strides. "I hoped you would, but I did not let myself believe it." "I promised," Thomas said simply, "and I needed to see you again, both of you." Sequoia appeared behind her sister, a smile spreading across her strong features. "Then you have chosen a new path, Thomas Reed." "I have, if you'll have me. I can scout, hunt, track, whatever you need. I want to learn your ways, help your people if I can. I want to belong somewhere, to someone." The sisters exchanged one of their meaningful glances. Then Aita stepped forward and took his hands in hers. "You already belong," she said softly. "From the moment we pulled you from that storm, you became part of our story. Now we will see where that story leads." Where it led was to a life Thomas had never imagined possible. He became a bridge between worlds, helping the Cherokee navigate the complexities of government treaties while teaching willing white settlers to respect the land and its original inhabitants. His tracking skills proved invaluable in helping the tribe locate and rescue lost children, track game during harsh winters, and avoid cavalry patrols when necessary. But more than that, he found love. It came slowly, growing from gratitude to friendship, to something deeper and more abiding. The Cherokee had different customs about relationships than the white world he'd come from, more fluid understandings of how love could be structured. What he shared with Aita and Sequoia was beyond his old world's conventions, but it was real and true and sustainable. A year after he arrived, during the tribe's spring ceremony, they formalized their bond in a traditional ritual that recognized all three as partners, chosen family. Bound by more than law or custom, bound by mutual respect and genuine love. The tribal elder who performed the ceremony smiled at Thomas as he painted the sacred symbols on his forehead. "You came to us as a stranger, half dead from cold and fever. You leave this ritual as one of the people, fully alive, for perhaps the first time. This is what it means to be reborn." Standing between Aita and Sequoia, their hands clasped with his, Thomas understood the truth of those words. He'd been reborn that night in the cabin, when two extraordinary women had shown him that mercy was stronger than judgment, That connection was more valuable than isolation. That desire in its truest form was not about possession, but about choosing, again and again, to remain. As the ceremony concluded and the tribe began to celebrate, Thomas looked up at the spring sky, clear and bright and full of possibility. He thought about the frightened, lonely scout who'd huddled in that abandoned cabin, certain he would die alone. That man was gone, replaced by someone who understood his own worth because others had taken the time to show him. "What are you thinking?" Aita asked, leaning against his shoulder. "That I'm grateful I got lost in that storm," Thomas said. "That sometimes the worst moments lead to the best destinations." Sequoia laughed, her deep voice full of affection. "Only you would be grateful for nearly freezing to death, husband." The word still sent a thrill through him. Husband, partner, chosen one. All the things he'd never thought he'd be. "I learned the shape of desire that night," he said softly, speaking to both of them. "You taught me it wasn't just about bodies or pleasure, though those are good, but about being seen, being chosen, being deemed worth the effort of saving. You taught me that desire is really about connection, about building something together that's stronger than what any of us could build alone." "And now?" Aita prompted, her dark eyes worn with love. "Now I desire to spend every day of my life proving I was worth that effort, proving that the man you saved deserved your faith, building a life with you that honors what you gave me." "You already do that," Sequoia said, pulling him close. "Every day, in 100 small ways. This is what partnership means, Thomas Reed. Not grand gestures, but steady presence. Not owing debts, but sharing burdens. This is the shape of desire fulfilled, choosing each other over and over, in the small moments and the large ones." As the celebration continued around them, and the sun set over the mountains, Thomas held his wives close and felt completely, utterly at home. He'd come to the territory seeking escape and found instead a purpose. He'd faced death in that cabin and discovered life. He'd been taught by two giant women, not just in stature, but in spirit, that love was always a choice, and that the choice to love and be loved was the bravest act of all. The shape of desire, he understood now, was simply this: two hands reaching out in the darkness, and a third hand brave enough to grasp them both. It was warmth, shared in the cold. It was knowledge, given freely. It was seeing another person's vulnerability and responding not with exploitation, but with care. It was surviving together, and then choosing to stay together once survival was no longer in question. It was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Thomas, Aita, and Sequoia's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.